as I was saying, Emma, until people get in here, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how the dinner was last night. I'm quite curious myself.
Well, these kind of dinners are always quite a good quite a good moment to get in touch with a lot of different people that you want to talk to, right? So in this case, it was arranged by 21X, by the guys at 21X, Severin and Max in particular. Max also has been, I think last week he has been in the US. He had a similar one with the likes of BlackRock, with Vanguard, with a lot of heavy hitters from America, from the US. And it went extremely well. So he wanted to to replicate the model in Amsterdam, and of course, given our close relationship, then they asked us to help out with organizing it, and I offered to co-sponsor it, and we also had the colleagues from Halborn too. And yeah, well, it is one of these things that normally you do, and during the dinner it doesn't really happen a lot. I mean, you fluff a lot about a lot of different things with people that are there. Nothing really. Oh, now I see sort of myself. Okay, Chris.
Oh, nice. We can see. Welcome, Jade. Also.
No, I can also see myself. So it's lots of lots of fluff, nothing too crazy. However, the interesting thing happens afterwards, right? So it's when roughly 40%, 50% of the people leave, and you remain at the bar. So outside of the restaurant there is a bar, and those that know me know that I do not drink alcohol, but a lot of the guests do, and things get a little looser, and the tone of voice gets a little more intimate, and then that is where the actual conversations start. So, as a matter of fact, it's not too good health-wise, because I went to bed around I think 3 a.m. So I stayed up late, also to to talk with the people that you want to talk to, those that actually have certain ideas that they want to experiment, and that is where basically business is done normally. So yesterday, I'm not completely sure if I can divulge the list of attendees until coordinating together with the guys at 21X and Alborn, also because there were regulators at the dinner from the DNB, so the Dutch National Bank. So we need to be particularly attentive to what we say in public. But what I can say is the fact that practically all the major banks in the Netherlands, in the Benelux, in fact, were well represented, together also with some partners from the German side. And there was a little bit of a diverse crowd. The setup was intimate. There were, I believe, something between 30 or 40 participants, and we didn't really accept more than one representative per institution, because and the waiting list was, we were overbooked, so we had to say no to some people, which it's it's actually a testament of the interest that we were able to trigger. So I went there around 4 o'clock. The dinner was at 6 o'clock. I went there at 4 o'clock because I had 2 different meetings scheduled with 2 different undisclosed partners that unfortunately shall remain undisclosed for now, for the wider audience. But let me say that basically they are counterparties of MPEGs from overseas, but not from overseas the US, from overseas the UK, which is quite a close quite a close legislation to what we are trying to do here in the Netherlands. And the topic of the dinner was, it's what you might imagine, just RWA, tokenization, blah blah blah. Nothing very interesting, to be honest. But afterwards, actually, during the drinks, we managed to get a word or two, with the right people. Sorry, guys. So, I guess that's as good as as an answer that I can give at this particular point in time. I think it went very, very well. There were people from protocols. There was Fleece. I think I can disclose. There was the CEO of Midnight. And Midnight, I believe, is the privacy-preserving network sponsored directly by Cardano. And interestingly, actually, there was also the CEO of Cardano, not at the dinner, but he was in the same hotel because he came for Money 2020. So that is the reason why basically he sent his most trustworthy people there at the dinner also to see what was up. And also because there is a lot of the Dusk novelties in the Midnight protocol too. So I had actually very, very interesting conversation with these guys.
That sounds promising. So it was quite a fun dinner, especially once the drink started pouring in and the actual conversation, like the more interesting, or the tongues got loosened.
It was a fun and productive after dinner. The dinner itself is as boring as it comes.
Makes sense. Well, that's exciting to hear, and I'm definitely quite curious to see what comes up of these chats that happen during the after dinner conversations.
Well, there are a couple that I can say about it, right? So one is the fact that I am restraining to advertise in practice what is going to happen, because I think that from a marketing perspective, from a project perspective, I think that it doesn't really serve us well to keep announcing partners, and without really deploying the applications that these partners are going to use or these partners can use in order to deploy assets. So what I am going to say is the fact that basically we are working very hard to get to the point in which essentially anything that we do, any kind of partnerships, prospect, pilots, real business applications, we are not going to divulge. We are just going to launch and then divulge, which I think is probably a better way than announcing a partnership and then getting hype over it, and then the hype dies down because there isn't really a place where we can redirect our users and those enthusiastic for the products that we are about to deploy. So at this particular point in time, again, I am not going to advertise too much what is going to happen. I'm going to talk about it generically, and I am going to provide as much as possible, basically an update about where we are concretely with with our plan, with our program. And because of that, I think this should be the main topic of this of today conversation with the community.
I love that. I agree, and it's. Oh, sorry, Jade, go ahead.
No, I was going to change the subject slightly. You go.
Well, we can choose the subject. I was just. Oh, sorry.
Can you tell us a bit about your speech? I think everybody got to give a bit of a 2-3 minute speech. What were your 2-3 minutes on?
my speech was the following, and I'm not joking, is I have been told literally this was my speech that I didn't really memorize, but sort of, something that I can recall pretty easily. Somebody told me that something very wise, and the wise thing is the fact that nobody's going to complain when a speech actually is too short. And therefore, my speech is, I'm going to talk with each one of you in the after dinner. Enjoy your dinner. This was my speech. And then I did. I actually got to anyone, to everyone, and I talked directly with them. I mean, I can talk a lot about basically DLT. I talked a lot about the vision of Dusk and this kind of stuff. But in a one-to-one settings, in an intimate setting, is you really get the message across because people can talk to you. Whereas when you are actually preaching, then you get their attention probably for 35 seconds, and then everything that you're gonna say just remains on the generic, right? So this was the strategy that I adopted yesterday. If I have to, I believe that what you want to know is basically what I talked about with these people in, the many one-on-one sessions that I had with them, which weren't one-on-ones. It was just, drinks and normal chat. And a lot of these things, I tend basically to be, I wouldn't say adversarial, but definitely quite controversial when I'm talking to people, because it's the best way basically to grab their attention. And especially with institutions like banking institutions, what they are trying to do, or what everybody is telling, is that these institutions, especially banks, are at the forefront of the tokenization. So everybody is saying, hey, are you tokenized this? Are you tokenized that? Are you running pilots? Do you want to run a pilot with me? The thing that I told them, the topic of conversation with these guys, where you guys have absolutely zero reason to be in tokenization. And the reason is that tokenization doesn't really do any good to you personally or to your clientele. It does a lot for all the different kind of other institutions that are basically have got a use for decentralization, right? So when we are talking about decentralization, then we are talking about basically dispossessing institution of their technical infrastructure to make sure that the community runs the technical infrastructure, to make sure that node runners run the technical infrastructure, so that institutions can, in fact, concentrate and focus on what is their business. Now, banks, they do not issue assets. What banks are about, they are about cash. They are about payment. And therefore, basically, they are users of a certain, of a certain setup, of a certain configuration. And that was basically what we talked about. So how these banks can let go of the bullshit about tokenizing whatever the fuck, because they are not going to do that themselves, but instead how they can exploit, how they can use the tokenization when that is correctly implemented in the financial infrastructure. So basically exchanges or clearinghouses or a settlement system. This is basically what we talked about. And when I said something like that, they basically said, well, you know what? You are absolutely right. In fact, what we are trying to do is not tokenizing assets. I mean, we have innovation department that do, blockchain circles as a service, and so that we have something to show. But actually, our business is basically to move money, to get money from our clients, to get money from from those that use the banking system, and invest it into something else. They don't really issue assets. They basically get assets that are issued by somebody else, an organization, and normally they buy these assets, or they broker these assets from where these assets live, which is on either a crowdfunding institution or a secondary market or a primary market institution. So when I said something like that, then basically they opened up, and I got to know about a lot of different initiatives that they are doing. For instance, the major banks in the Netherlands, and I'm talking about, and I am not going to confirm or deny that they were at the dinner yesterday. You can assume that some of them, all of them, one of them were at the dinner, but Rabobank, ABN AMRO, ING, and Commerzbank, they are basically just working on a bank-backed stablecoin. Now, when we're talking about a bank-backed stablecoin, that's good and all. I mean, it's great. It is something that that's been there for quite a while. The concept of a stablecoin. Now we are talking about banking institutions that want to do that, and therefore they do that in a consortium. So imagine a bank which is already quite slow in putting up any kind of new product, and suddenly they have a governance of multiple different banks is actually something that goes very slowly, but they are very excited about that. Now, the interesting thing about this bank-backed stablecoin is, what is that used for? Where is basically their killer application? And if you are thinking payment, think again, that's not basically what this is about. Why? Because banks are not in charge of the currency, of the monetary system. They cannot impose the supermarket to accept a certain kind of stablecoin. They can make it actually easier, but ultimately it's the central bank that just as gap or just issue money, currencies, legal tender. So what they can do is basically just create a digital representation, but this digital representation needs to have a very specific use case. A very specific use case that yesterday was pretty clear. Direct cash clearing for asset trading settlement, which is something that is quite it's quite normal for us. It is something that we've been imagining, working on, having a vision since quite a while. But then when you basically just tell to their face, hey, what you guys are working on, I don't care about what your innovation department is working on. I actually want to know what your business development department is working on and how we can help out in making sure that your product, which is essentially cash or digital cash, has got a killer use case. Well, that is where the conversation becomes interesting. And here I am not going to, again, confirm or deny that there is going to be a pilot or any kind of follow-up on that. But as you might imagine, these are the kind of conversation that you want to have. That for what concerns the banking institution. And then there were many other different kind of institutions. There were the usual asset managers. I spoke with a couple of them. And they normally what they do, they manage assets. They do custody essentially for a lot of different high net worth individuals. There are a couple of these institutions, and what is the difference between these or the solutions that these institutions offer compared to the normal, Fireblocks or Copper or all this kind of custodial system? Well, basically the entirety of the chain or the management of the keys, the management of the asset itself, and they get a lot of money for it. Like a lot of money, something along the line of 40K, 50K per client to manage assets. Something that can be done pretty easily in a self-custody way with the right policy by using a zero trust architecture, or for example the one that we integrated with Cordial and we are going to launch on MPEX. So, and this was the primary conversation that I had with these kind of asset managers. Then there were others, like for instance those that are trying to the usual real estate, which quite frankly I don't find it very interesting. And in fact, I actually skimmed a little bit on those conversations, but they are there, and they were there, and it was something definitely that we talked to. And then the most interesting ones were products that we actually are actively trying to get on our network. And when I speak about get on our network, I'm actually speak about getting on MPEX or any kind of partners that has got assets directly in a decentralized fashion on an application that basically our users and our community can use, which is money market funds. So money market funds are very interesting for us because money market funds, like bonds, like any kind of yield-bearing products, they can be, they according to me, they are the next step into cash handling. Why? Because this kind of products, they are extremely liquid, so you can get in and get out of the market pretty easily, which is basically something that the market has been recognizing as a winning application. I mean, if you look at Athena, if you look at Morpho, if you look at Ondo, if you look at practically any kind of RWA, they have that kind of concept. They create a stable coin. The stable coin is a yield-bearing stable coin because it's backed by something. And normally this something is very liquid. It must be very liquid in order basically to redeem it very, very quickly. And the most liquid and the most interesting assets are money market funds. And I also do envision a future in which money market fund backed EMTs are definitely going to go from being in the hands of the usual institutions that are gateway into the hands of the users, right? And this was the most interesting part of the conversations that I had because there were very heavy hitters in terms of money market funds, not really, the funds themselves, but those that basically work with these money market funds that have it on their venues, and there were concrete steps taken in order basically for Dusk, actually the MPEX brokerage system, to become a client, or rather the other way around, for those institutions to become a client for MPEX and to basically get these assets on an MPEX DApp, so to speak, or an MPEX marketplace on somebody else's DApp. And this was the most interesting part of my conversations. There were many others and many other plans made, but I don't want to overwhelm everybody also because I'm talking since 20 minutes. So probably somebody wants to ask some more questions.
One thing I always wonder is when you talk about like the people running the infrastructure, aren't the up some of their control for the benefits that they see, or is that going to end up?
It's always a matter of costs and benefit, right? So there are certain institutions that basically if they let go of the control, they let go of their business model, and those are the institutions that you cannot talk. Is basically the central bank system that allows for security settlement and for cash settlements, cash clearance, and this is ultimately the backbone of the financial infrastructure in Europe. In front of it, you have clearinghouses and CSDs. Now, you can talk with clearinghouses and you can talk with CSDs, of course. You can basically try to, come up with a way to talk with them. But of course, if they give away their infrastructure, what is left? Nothing, because the heavy lifting is done by the T2S system, right? So going there and tell them that they can, offload their system to the community, they can offload their system to a decentralized infrastructure, and they are not going to incur their cost. Essentially, this disrupts their model. So they're never going to basically say, oh, this is a great idea, let's go for it. You need to find a different way, basically, to collaborate with them. But that is an optimization. It's never about basically a transformative way to, I suppose, propose something constructive. And then you have all the different other kind of financial institutions for whom the infrastructure, and especially the technology infrastructure, is a burden. So, for instance, exchanges. Now, exchanges are burdened by the infrastructure. They have to basically maintaining it. It's a lot of different costs. Broker, same thing. Why? Well, simply because when you have trading, then the trade need to be settled. So it need to go through the security part, need to go through the CSD, and then ultimately to T2S. The cash part needs to go through the clearinghouse and then ultimately to T2S, right? So these things are all costs for them. So there is absolutely nothing that they are gaining in basically just maintaining the vertically integrated infrastructure. So they are the most receptive to let that all go and have, almost free or, for gas cost fees. Essentially, they can do what they are already doing, but without the cost. Not only that, you can also pitch to them all the different other value propositions that are brought by the DLT. For instance, 24/7 trading, instant settlement, no CCP costs, no counterparty risk, no clearing cost, DVP, which is only a fraction of what they're paying right now, and ultimately also letting go of their technical infrastructure. Now, like that, they're basically dropping the costs. And we actually are doing exactly that with Ampex, because we are slowly but surely just migrating the infrastructure toward a decentralized system. So a DEX, if you will, which is still under the license of Ampex. It is still controlled by Ampex, because Ampex needs to, report to the IFM, it needs to report to the regulators, it needs essentially to make sure that all the different KYC, KYB, AML are respected. They have to monitor the transaction. They have to monitor for market manipulation, those kind of stuff. But ultimately, they can do that also in a decentralized setup, so that basically the trading is on chain, or at least is rerouted or is triggered on chain, and then they have the same, or they retain the same capability, but without having the cost. And considering that Ampex has also a brokerage license that Dusk can make full use of, then Ampex can go on other exchanges, right? Well, it's not going to be that much of a mystery that we have a partnership with 21X. So basically what we will do would be to get the asset of 21X and to reroute the order from, the Dusk applications, dApps, to open this up for application developers and other kind of application providers, third-party providers, but also our own or our Ampex marketplace. Get the orders there, route them to 21X, have these orders done on chain. There's nothing else that needs to happen, because 21X at the moment has got the license basically to bypass completely CSDs and clearinghouses. And this is also the license that we are pursuing at the moment. But 21X will essentially just shorten the path for us. But then we can also do the same with any kind of exchanges, only not on chain. At that particular point in time, we will have to have a representation of these assets, but these assets are custodied by Ampex. So if Ampex says, well, you know what, I am going to obey what the ledger says, then it's as good as basically having these assets on chain. So when you're talking, so getting back to your question, when you're talking to different kind of people, different kind of institutions, then it depends on what is their business model and what the DLT can do for them. And the most interesting thing is that sometimes the DLT can do nothing to them. So when you have, what they say, right? So when you have a hammer, everything is a nail. Well, there are many different protocols out there that are trying to essentially just push DLT down the throat of different kind of business cases, but that's sometimes simply not the answer. But when you have the answer, then that is where you have to hammer that nail home, right? So yes, so that is the kind of reactions that I get, and somehow I have been developing also a reasonable skill in understanding how DLT, if it can bring any benefit at all to these people.
Awesome. Let's get to the community questions, which is what I think George was going to do. All right. So first question is, who is developing the Ampex DApp? Is it in-house or a third party?
So the Ampex DApp. So the Ampex DApp is essentially the capability for Ampex to provide assets that are securities, right? So or some form of tokenized securities. That is basically what I mean with the Ampex DApp. Now, when we're talking about DApp, then normally people might think about a user interface and the capability, to use this user interface to do something. What I actually mean is the capability of getting these assets from, the Ampex system at the moment, but Ampex is not the only MTF that we are working with. A certain exchange or a certain venue, getting these assets, tokenizing it, and then basically offering them. Now, this can happen directly on an Ampex app, not DApp, app application. So basically a DApp that also has got a UI in front, so that people can trade. But the interesting part is the fact that when we are capable of launching the Ampex DApp, so from the backend, then anyone that will build on top of Dusk will have access to these kind of assets, which is incredibly interesting for them. So to answer your question, both we are basically working with third party that indeed had the interest of using this kind of assets, because this kind of assets actually do not exist anywhere else, and augment, enhance what they are already doing. Think of a DEX that at some point has stocks on it, right? We can do that for these third parties. At the same time, we also want to have our own, not only a marketplace in somebody else's third-party application, but also a Dusk application. Why do we want that? Just for branding. Just for that. Not that there is absolutely, let me be clear, there is absolutely no other reason to have a DEX that is living alongside of a third-party DEX, because essentially these assets are composable. But for branding reason, for marketing reason, it's actually pretty good if we have a Dusk application that allows also some form of a bulletin board and this kind of things. But ultimately, we want to attract third-party applications, because those basically bring their own user base. So the answer to your question is basically both. The Ampex DApp is something that we are doing because nobody else can, because we are working on the back end of Ampex and we are basically make sure that the backend of MPEX is available to third-party application. MPEX app or MPEX marketplace for this kind of asset, it is something that we are offering to anyone that builds on top of Dusk, third-party, but also ourselves for branding reasons.
Awesome. The next question, there's one that I think was already answered, so I'll skip that. What's the status of Quantos stablecoin, and where can we use it in DeFi?
As soon as basically the MPEX app is up and running. So Quantos, the Quantos stablecoin is okay, let me rewind a little bit. Initially, at the beginning of the year, what we tried to do was to build the entire ecosystem on Dusk layer 1. So Dusk layer 1 is essentially was essentially just a monolith, right? So it was basically a blockchain that had consensus, that had data availability implicit, and has PyCrust, so virtual machine, basically the execution layer. Everything was in one. And therefore, we tried basically to integrate all our different parties or our different partners, application, whatnot, on the layer 1 itself by creating, the smart contracts on PyCast on the different on the execution layer that we had for the layer 1. But then quickly we saw that, in particular, Quantos that had a lot of different needs that used a lot of different tools that were readily available on other kind of execution layer, and that we had to develop from scratch. And these kind of tools, for instance, are RPC. They were expecting certain RPCs. They were expecting certain kind of interface. Like when we are talking about the ERC 3684, for instance, which is the tokenization interface. Those interfaces are established. They might be imperfect. They suck balls, but they are established, and that's basically what these guys had. So we found out that in order to integrate these guys, we had to still keep working on a lot of different infrastructural items that were a little different than what we did, because essentially Dusk was created ad hoc immediately. And that is where, and since we already had, a pilot of an EVM execution layer running on top of Dusk as a layer 1, then we took the decision basically of moving the execution layer, or the main execution layer, you can think of it as the application layer, on its own network. In this case, basically what we call DuskEVM. Why? Because it is work that we need to do once, and then we have all this different kind of tooling that all these integrators need in order basically to integrate their systems, their products, their assets on top of Dusk. And this has a lot of different benefits. I elaborated on those, and I am happy to get on that again, but I don't want to basically just get off the rail too much. So getting back on Quantos, basically the work on Quantos is done. We could essentially integrate it on the layer 1, but we don't want to do that. We want basically to use the execution layer, because having just the stable coin, just having EuroQ on the layer 1 and nothing else is absolutely useless. So, and also we do not want to develop a shitload of different kind of infrastructural tool that is again just putting a lot of delays on what really matters here, which are the applications. So we want to put out applications as soon as possible. So we decided to focus on DuskEVM, get it, launch it as soon as possible, and then at that particular point in time, any kind of integration is going to take 2 days, 3 days, not more than that. Why? Because all the tooling is there, right? The Solidity contracts that normally these guys have on Polygon, on ZK Sync or whatever, they are already done. They can basically just be deployed as is on Dusk, right? And at that particular point in time, so what is the value proposition of Dusk at for that. There are two value propositions that are absolutely pretty strong, and we shouldn't really kind of lose ourselves into the technicalities of layer 2, layer 1, execution layer, RPC infrastructure, and whatnot. There are many other DSL, many other things, right? So these two value propositions are the fact that we are the only one in the world that have got the license to basically put regulated assets on chain. So we should use that moat. We should use that value proposition. And the other thing is the fact that we have privacy, that we had the capability of extending interfaces that right now are quite common with privacy. And we also created a layer 1 that basically is, that has regulation requirements backed in, like for instance, selected disclosure, for instance, or audits for regulators and all sorts of stuff. So, so to answer your question, basically, DuskEVM is what we want to launch as soon as possible, and everything else is going to be on cascade from that point on. The only thing that we'll need is essentially the UI, because the smart contracts already exist.
Next question is, who is building dApps that utilize Dusk?
I am not going to. I'm not going to announce names at this particular point in time. I can tell one thing though. So we are making use of third parties to help us roll out DuskEVM as soon as possible. And for what concern apps on top of Dusk, you will have to wait until we will announce those. Some of them we already announced. But the details we are going to keep for marketing campaigns that will drive usage to the application, and I don't want to dilute it on a random community update on a Tuesday afternoon.
Yeah, that would ruin all of our PR for the announcement
and your job too, because in the end you will have to create hype on a already diluted news that I just spilled on a random.
Yes. The next question is there any work being done on the nodes themselves, for example, the archiver and improver, or are there any plans to incentivize them in the future? I'm curious what role the nodes play in your future plans.
Okay, so this is a very interesting question, so I'm going to elaborate a little bit about that. So nodes, so basically, if we look at how we are proceeding in terms of our development, then what I said is that there is going to be an application layer. Initially, it's going to be DuskEVM, but we are also going to roll out another application layer, which is going to be entirely private, which you can think of it as, DuskEVM and PyCrust EVM, or PyCrust VM, right? So these two different application layers, you can think of PyCrust VM is exactly as Dusk right now. So, but with the benefit that it's not going to be commingled with an account model. So that execution layer will be entirely devoted to privacy. Okay, so there is not going to be any account model there. Everything is going to be Phoenix based. It's going to be PyCrust based. There is going to be zero knowledge tools and all that. So that is entirely private and compliant, of course. Whereas DuskEVM is only going to have confidentiality because the EVM is account based. There is nothing we can do about that. Everything is based on accounts, so the accounts will have to stay. There cannot be anonymity, there can only be pseudonymity. But what we are going to do is we are going to add confidentiality to the payload, so you cannot really see what gets traded. You only see who is the initiator of a certain transaction, or the pseudonymous of the initiator of a certain transaction, and and the target, the recipient of the transaction in question. Now, this means that the layer 1 is going to have a very specific utility. What is the utility of the layer 1? Essentially security. What is the security, or what gives the security model? Proof of stake. So the layer 1 is going to be essentially just that, the capability for nodes to be able to do one thing and do it very well, which is essentially just providing to the layer 2, so to the execution layer, consensus and data availability. The consensus depends on proof of stake for, as a Sybil resistant methodology. And of course, considering that the layer 1 remains in our hand, it remains in the hands of the core developers. The core developers will be freed from the burden of having to develop applications. So they will keep focusing on the nodes to make them more efficient, to make them more secure, and to make sure basically that the overall layer 1 will be as simplified as possible in order to become scalable and secure. So this is basically what is going to happen. And of course, when we are talking about the layer 1, we are talking about the nodes, so Rusk essentially. There is a couple of words to be spent about basically the execution layer, because the execution layer will have their own sequencers. So those are also sort of nodes that we are going to embed in the Dusk layer 1 nodes in order to enshrine the execution layer operations and to make them more efficient. And yes, so there is going to be definitely a lot of work that is going to be done on the node itself. But first thing first, our priority is basically to put out the application layer as soon as possible.
And then related to that, someone asks if the decline in market cap is an issue for security, I guess in terms of how many people can run nodes. And are you currently satisfied with the staking activity / node spread?
So the short answer is yes. The market cap has got an impact on the security of the protocol. Is it concerning? No, I don't think so, because if somebody basically wants to attack the network, as a matter of fact, they will need to acquire Dusk. So essentially, there will be some kind of positive price action. Let me put it that way. And also the fact that the layer 1 at the moment is still dependent on the Genesis contracts basically makes it so that it is quite difficult for anyone from a technical point of view to actually come up with an alternative to that. So from a security perspective, essentially, the only thing that the most worrying thing that a tiny market cap can do is basically governance. But at this particular point in time, Dusk, the foundation, is governing the protocol. So, and that's because we are still heavily in development. It is still my intention to basically proceed toward a decentralization of the governance. So at that particular point in time, the market cap is going to be a much more pressing topic. But until that happens, then we are relatively safe.
Great, that is good to hear. These are some more questions. There's 6 of them from the same person. One is, can you walk us through the current stage of MPEG/21 integrations? What's the biggest hurdle left before we see the first live assets on chain?
DuskEVM.
Okay. Which partner is furthest along in testing, and what's the realistic time frame for their go live, or are they final testing?
I am not going to divulge this information, but among those that you guys know, then you can think that Quantos and Ampex are probably those.
I imagine this might be another one then that you can't answer. How many institutions have access to Dusk's documentation or test environments? Can you share any feedback from them?
Okay. So the point here is the fact that you guys are too used to the other chains, right? So let's get back to the value proposition of Dusk. What is the value proposition of Dusk? The value proposition of Dusk is basically providing assets that other chains cannot provide. What are these assets? Securities. In Europe, securities, right? No one can provide securities unless basically they have a certain license. So that's our value proposition. Now, for us, the capability or this kind of capability basically attracts certain parties that you can think of, parties that are actually either asset suppliers or those that are applications. So on the front end of the asset, you can think of a pipeline. The assets are here. Assets gets into this pipe, and then they get out on the front end, which is what you guys normally do. Okay. So what is the asking stuff like how many partners are there, or this kind of things? What kind of partners are you talking about? Assets? Assets I already spoke about quite a lot at the very beginning of this conversation, right? So what we are looking at are money market funds, bonds, yield-bearing products, stablecoin, these kind of things. Are you talking about those that essentially are on the front end? But you can think about the entirety of the EVM. You can think about Aave, you can think about Gnosis, you can think about anyone that has got an application. Basically, either they deploy on DuskEVM or we can basically fork it. Who cares? The important thing is the fact that we are capable of bringing these assets there. Why? Because it is something that nobody else has. And therefore, basically, it is something that either there is absolutely no interest in the market to trade these products, but I don't believe so, because, stocks are traded practically since 3 centuries ago. There is a market for it, and there is nobody that is basically just putting stocks on chain, because either they are institutions and have zero interest in doing that because they they are not symbiotic to a protocol, or they are a protocol and therefore they cannot do that because the regulators would basically just put them all in jail. So when we're talking about partners, be specific. Ask me what kind of parties you're talking about. If it is on the front end, assume that essentially the entirety of the DeFi world is interested in this kind of assets. Why they are not doing it? Because we don't have the execution layer yet. We don't have an execution layer that they can integrate very easily. Now, who are going to be the first? Well, I will tell you that basically the very interesting part for us would be to bring liquidity, so bridges. But from that point on, you can, it's a blue sky. We either attract those or we basically fork them. Uniswap, great example. But that's not interesting. What is interesting is basically getting the right assets. And that's basically where my attention is at the moment.
Awesome. I'm just going to round out the pre-submitted questions and then get to the ones that are being asked now. There's a question a little bit about some future things. I think these questions, maybe you can't go into a lot of detail, but it's talking generally about what success would look like, for example, by the end of 2025. And what are you feeling most confident about?
Success in 2025 would be tens, if not hundreds of millions of euros of assets that are basically tokenized and offered and locked on the execution layer. That's basically what success would look like. I would also love for anyone to be able to on-ramp and off-ramp very, very quickly using normal tools, account abstraction, wallet, these kind of things. And we have confirmed internal partnerships for those two, by the way. So this is basically what success would look like. Getting the current MPEX asset on chain so that people can basically just get in, get out of those. These kind of assets, we will see whether we can immediately activate 24/7 trading for those, or there can be some hybrid solution in which essentially there is going to be 24/7 trading of the synthetic part outside of market hours, and within the market hours the synthetic parts are going to be reconciled with the real assets. We will see. But so the MPEX assets together with assets that are not on MPEX right now.
Sounds good. There were quite a few questions about DuskEVM. I think some of the more technical ones, T-, I think you're going to be added to a different group that might answer some of those questions. But Emma, would you maybe clarify a little bit about the execution layer and moving those things around? Because there were quite a few questions about it, but I don't think you need to get too deep into the technicalities because some of these questions might be better addressed, or
hit me with the question themselves.
Well, the first question from T- is, hold on, what do you mean moving the execution layer to layer 2? And then there are some more questions about, will the Moonlight transaction model remain on the L1?
At the moment, so this what I'm providing is basically a strategic direction. It's not basically something that we are working actively on. It is where we want to be. And where we want to be as soon as basically these application layers are in fact widely used, which is basically my priority. I don't want to waste any more time on infrastructural work that doesn't really bring TVL and transaction over the network. That said, and that aside, initially the execution layer is going to be DuskEVM. The Dusk layer 1 will remain as is. So there is going to be Pygrass, there is going to be essentially basically Pygrass and the capability of doing smart contracts as we are. I know that T- is part of Soju, I'm never sure how to pronounce it, and therefore basically the utility of using hyperstaking and doing what they are doing at the moment remains, because the primary utility of the layer 1 revolves around the proof of stake, so the consensus, and the capability basically of just locking in more Dusk and delegate the node running to professionals. Soju, I think, is a perfect use case, and is perfectly in the spirit of the layer 1 right now. Strategically speaking, in the long run, what we want is basically just remove Pygrass from the layer 1. So removing the execution layer from the layer 1 and putting it on the layer 2. What does this mean for Soju? Most likely the fact that we will talk with them, of course, but most likely a way basically to enshrine their application, or their application basically in the binaries. So we're not going to remove it from it. It's probably going to be enshrined in the binaries, and then the binaries is going to be it was going to remain essentially as the soul of the layer 1 of the modular stack, essentially.
Thank you. I'm sure that was why T- was like, what? Do I need to change everything? There's just 2 more questions. One is about how many people are working and coding, which I would say we have a pretty decent team, and it's not that more people necessarily means that everything happens faster either.
Yeah, so at the moment, engineers that are actively working on coding are the core team and third-party developers that we are using also to cover the gap in knowledge, so the knowledge gap with the whole EVM world. So I would say a little over 20 people, I believe, just purely coding and engineers.
Awesome. And then the final question, can builders use DuskEVM outside of the MPEX use case? I would say the answer is yes.
Solely yes.
For everything really that they want.
Yes, essentially everything that is on the on other EVM chain can be ported with zero or little modifications to DuskEVM. That's why we're doing this. And this is a model that has been working in the past. That's been working for Phantom. That's been working for Avalanche. That's been working for all the different kind of EVM chain. In our case, basically the fact that the EVM part is a layer 2 also brings a lot of other benefits, like scalability is one of those, and the capability of extending the interfaces that right now are there with our primary value proposition, which is privacy. Although basically I probably should speak more of confidentiality rather than privacy.
Wonderful. I think that's it. I think we've answered pretty much everything that we can get to. And we're at the time. I understand this is like an hour's call, so I think we're good. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, George, for arranging this. This is a George project. I gate crashed. And thank you, Emma, for your time. It's good to... Oh, sorry, there was one more question missed. Will MPEX run on L1 or L2, all other exchanges? L2. Okay.
But again, MPEX has got its own system, so it is going to the bridge of its own asset is going to be on the L2. The layer 1 is going to be the settlement for the execution layer. The execution layer will have also a lot of different other operations from MPEX as well as other institutions.
Awesome. So yeah, we're done. Thank you everybody for joining. Thank you, Emma, for your time. It's one of the cool things about crypto is that you get to have pretty direct access to the people leading the projects that you're invested in. So thank you. And George, do you need me to do anything, or we just leave the stage and your recording is something that you're doing on your side? Okay, we're all good. So thank you guys. Bye.
Thank you. I'll see you guys next week.